But February made me shiver with every paper I delivered. Bad news on the doorstep. I couldn't take one more step. And I can't remember if I cried when I read about his widowed bride. But something touched me deep inside the day the music died. I think most of us have probably heard those lyrics. Maybe we don't all know the story behind that song. It's called American Pie. It tells lyrics that can be confusing and very kind of a lot of poetic license and descriptive language. But the bottom line is it's about February 3rd, 1959, which has gone down in history as the day the music died. That's the day that Charles Hardin, Buddy Holly, along with J.P. Richardson, who was known as the Big Bopper, and a 17-year-old kid just starting his career named Richie Valens, along with the pilot Roger Peterson, went down in a plane crash outside of Mason City, Iowa. I've had the opportunity to be there at the site of the crash, but also at the place where they played their last concert at the Surf Ballroom a few years back. And so I thought we would take a look at that event today. I know it's not the anniversary of February 3rd or anything like that, but I was looking for something to do a reaction to today and stumbled upon that one in my recommendations. We're going to give this channel another chance. We did one once before, and honestly, it was a mixed bag. I wasn't real crazy about some of their research. So it's weird history. We're going to see if they do a little better this time. Join me as we dive into what really happened the day the music died.
February 3rd, 1959, three musicians, Buddy Holly, Richie Valens, J.P. Richardson, known best at the time as the Big Bopper, on the cusp of rock and roll legend, hopped on a chartered plane in an effort to avoid a hellish bus ride through a brutal Midwestern snowstorm. Within minutes after takeoff, the airplane crashed, killing everyone on board and changing the timeline of pop music forever. Today, we're going to find out what actually happened the day the music died. But before we get started, take a second to subscribe to the Weird History channel and let us know what musical stories you would like to hear about. Now, on to the early morning of February 3rd, 1959, in Clear Lake, Iowa. The Winter Dance Party Tour, headlined by Buddy Holly, who had recently broke away from his band, The Crickets, was seemingly doomed from the very beginning.
Yeah.
It started on January 23rd, 1959, in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and zigzagged through Iowa and Minnesota with absolutely no regard for logistics. Bill Griggs, a Buddy Holly historian, said, "They didn't care. It was like they threw darts at a map. The Tour from Hell. That's what they named it. And it's not a bad name." To add to the crappy conditions, the musicians were forced to travel on reconditioned school buses, not good enough for school kids, according to Griggs.
The buses weren't even heated, and they kept breaking down. At one point, Carl Bunch, who was the drummer for these bands, I know he was Buddy Holly's drummer, actually got frostbite and had to be hospitalized. And so then you have Buddy Holly playing drums for Richie Valens. I forget who played drums for Buddy, but like they were mixing and matching and trying to throw together band members because they were losing people to frostbite. You know, Buddy Holly was one of the original inductees into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. He went in at the same time as people like Elvis and Little Richard. He's considered like one of the fathers of rock and roll. And the guy was on a bus that kept freezing up and breaking down and had no heat on it and was on a tour that kind of went like this, and they were backtracking and going all over the place. It was not the life of a rock star by any sense of the imagination.
The buses were unheated, and driving through the bitterly cold winters of Wisconsin, Minnesota, and Iowa over icy roads took its toll on the vehicles and its passengers. Griggs estimates that 5 separate buses were used in the first 11 days of the tour. Holly's guitarist on the tour, Tommy Alsop, remembers driving through Wisconsin. We had started up this incline. It was snowing real bad, and the bus just started going slower and slower. And the lights got dimmer and dimmer, and all of a sudden the bus stopped. The driver said, "The bus is frozen." The musicians huddled together under blankets, burned newspapers in the aisle of the bus, drank shots, and told each other stories.
Think about this. These are rock stars. These are people whose songs are all over the radio. These are people playing to screaming crowds of teenagers. And they're burning newspapers in the aisle of a broken down bus to stay warm. It is no wonder Buddy Holly wanted to jump on a plane and get to the next town without having to go another couple of 100 miles in the middle of the night on a bus.
It was so cold, Holly's drummer Carl Bunch suffered frostbite in his feet and subsequently missed the next tour date, Holly's last. These hellish travel conditions would be what drove Holly to chartering an airplane on the night of February 3rd.
It was actually the night of February 2nd. It was the morning of February 3rd. The concert was February 2nd. The crash happened after midnight.
For more than a week, Holly, Richardson, Valens, and the rest of the musicians on the tour traveled around the upper Midwest in a bus, facing one challenge after another. The consensus was that everyone on the bus was growing tired and bitter due to the bad conditions. Not having any clean clothes didn't help matters. Part of the reason why Holly suggested skipping the bus ride after their Fargo, North Dakota gig to Moorhead, Minnesota, was because he wanted to wash his clothes. He figured the 400-mile flight from Fargo to Moorhead would buy him some spare time to do laundry and
Flight from Fargo to Moorhead. I don't know if they're just making a mistake here or if they meant to say. I think what it is, I think the flight was to Fargo, but the concert was in Moorhead. Let me double check that. Yeah, there's no 400-mile flight from Fargo to Moorhead. Fargo's right here. Moorhead's right here. They're a mile apart. I believe the flight was going to the Fargo, North Dakota airport from Mason City, Iowa. And the concert was going to be in Moorhead, which is right across the border right there. You can see. So that's really sloppy work right there on that one. They should have known that. Let me show you what really is going on here. So this is Mason City, Iowa down here. The concert that night was in Clear Lake at the Surf Ballroom. So they went from Clear Lake to the Mason City airport, which is, I think, right over on this side somewhere. And they were flying out of Mason City, and they crashed right there. You can see it right there. So, okay, here's the Mason City airport right here. And then here is the crash site right here. They were headed from Mason City, from the airport, toward Fargo, North Dakota.
Sleep before having to take the stage the following day. The other musicians agreed, and Valens, Richardson, and Holly took everyone's dirty laundry on board with them when they set off from the airport. Richie Valens wasn't originally supposed to board Holly's chartered plane. Holly offered one of the two spare seats to Dion DiMucci of Dion and the Belmonts, the opener on the tour. The flight cost Holly $108, so he offered Dion a spot on the plane for $36, a third of the price. Dion remembers the $36 offer because it was a significant amount of money to him.
Parents' rent.
When Buddy said, "That will be $36, he hit the magic number in my head. The rent for my parents' apartment was $36.
That wasn't actually a picture of Buddy Holly, by the way. I think that's someone playing Buddy Holly. He's wearing a wireless mic there.
He hit the magic number in my head. The rent for my parents' apartment was $36. And they argued all my life over that $36 because my father was a beautiful guy, but he was an emotional 13-year-old.
An emotional 13-year-old.
Ultimately, Dion thought the $36 fare, which was equivalent to well over $300 today, was too big of an expense to justify, so he passed on Holly's offer. Holly then asked his two bandmates if they wanted the seats. Guitarist Tommy Alsop and bassist Waylon Jennings were all set to make the flight.
So Waylon Jennings was pretty young too, and this is kind of his first big tour. Waylon was from the same town. He was from Lubbock, Texas, like Buddy, and Waylon knew each other from Lubbock. And Buddy had actually Waylon was kind of wanting to have a music career, but didn't really play the bass guitar. And so Buddy told Waylon to learn to play bass so he could go on the tour and be bass player on his tour. And so he did. And that was kind of really where Waylon got his first experience going out on tour, which turned into a lifelong career for him. But it started picking up bass just kind of on the fly so he could tour with his buddy. But
things changed when Richardson's flu, which he'd been battling for days, got worse.
Yep.
Jennings graciously gave the ailing Big Bopper his seat. Valens, who famously hated airplanes, was fighting a bad cold himself and asked Alsop for the other seat. Alsop still remembers the exchange he had with Valens after the singer said,
this is brutal.
"Are you going to let me fly, guy?" Alsop said, "No, let's flip a coin for it." I don't know why I said we should flip for it, because I'd been telling him no all evening. But I pulled a $50 out of my pocket. I've never understood what made me. It just happened. I flipped the 50-cent piece and said, "Call it." Richie said, "Heads." And it came down heads. Before he became an outlaw country music badass, Waylon Jennings played bass for Holly. When Holly told Jennings he had reserved one of the seats for him, the future bad boy of country music offered his spot to the Big Bopper, who had been fighting a savage flu throughout a good portion of the tour. Holly found it funny that Jennings was going to spend another cold night traveling on the road in a tour bus, and told him, "I hope your damn bus freezes up again." Jennings responded with a zinger of his own, saying, "Well, I hope your old plane crashes."
Yep,
Those
all
words
true.
came to haunt Jennings.
I've seen interviews with Waylon Jennings talking about that. Imagine what that had to feel like. Waylon Jennings, this wasn't just somebody he met on the tour. This was a guy he knew from back home. And he said, "I hope your plane crashes." And then it did. Imagine what that man lived with after saying that and it happened. That had to have been brutal for him.
God almighty. For years, I thought I caused the crash. February 2nd, 1959, marked the 11th stop of the tour at the Surf Ballroom in Clear Lake, Iowa. But it should be pointed out that this date wasn't even on the original tour itinerary. The second was supposed to be a day off for the musicians, but the tour's booker called ahead and found a venue to accommodate the lineup. After all, a day off meant no earnings.
So the Surf Ballroom is pretty cool when you go in there because it's got this big open dance floor in the middle and then seats around the outside of it. And then in the middle of the dance floor right in front is the stage, and it's a really small stage. It's a tiny venue. I mean, maybe 1,000 people could get inside, maybe a little more than that if you really packed it. So it's really quite something to think that that was the last place that one of the legends of rock and roll played.
The musicians performed 2 sets at the Surf Ballroom, the last of which ended around midnight. After the sets, a small group of fans followed Holly, Valens, and Richardson to the airport and waved as the 3 men boarded the plane.
That's another interesting point about the way that they played. They didn't just do like, okay, each musician did his set and then Buddy Holly was the big headliner at the end and that was the end of it. They did like a first act and a second act, and everybody played in the first part and everybody played again in the second part. And they actually have set lists of what Buddy Holly played that night. If you've ever seen the movie where Gary Busey plays Buddy Holly, it didn't really go down like that at all. They didn't have a big like band with brass instruments and all these backing people. It was Buddy, a bass guitar player, a lead guitar player, Tommy Alsop, a drummer, and that was it. And the last song he did was actually Brown Eyed Handsome Man, which was a cover, I think, of a Little Richard song.
As snow blew through the air...
No, maybe it's Gotta Be Traveling On. I don't know. Gotta Travel On. We're going to go look at the list real quick. Okay, it was. Gotta Travel On was the opening song that he did. The last song that he did was Brown Eyed Handsome Man, which was a Chuck Berry cover. Of course, some of these hugely popular songs, It Doesn't Matter Anymore is one that I've done over on VTH Extra. If you want to check that out, I'll put a link up at the end. Peggy Sue, probably his most popular, well-known song, along with That'll Be the Day, are the two that everybody knows the most. That'll Be the Day was his first number one. It might have been his only number one. It's So Easy, fantastic song. Every Day, a lot of people know that one. Every day, it's a getting closer. Oh Boy was a song. It says Sonny West cover because Sonny West originally did it, but Buddy made it popular. Oh Boy, he did on the Ed Sullivan Show, and this is the time in which they lived, right? Ed Sullivan wanted Buddy to change some of the lyrics because he thought they were too racy for TV. And the line in question was, all of my life I've been awaiting, tonight there'll be no hesitating. And that was the line that Ed Sullivan thought could not appear on his show. And when Buddy sang it anyway, Ed Sullivan actually turned his amp off on the side. And you can actually see Buddy get angry in the middle of the set when that happened. Early in the Morning's another cover. Rave On, a huge Buddy Holly song as well. And then, of course, Brown Eyed Handsome Man.
A small 4-seat Beechcraft Bonanza took off just after 12:30 a.m. on February 3rd. According to the Civil Aeronautics Board's report, the aircraft took off toward the south in a normal manner. After flying approximately 5 miles, witnesses back at the airport saw the plane's taillight slowly descending before completely disappearing. Radio contact with the aircraft disappeared as well.
I got to back up for a second because he said that they took off toward the south in a normal manner, but he didn't mention the fact that they turned because they were heading northwest when they crashed. So just a little misleading the way he read the first part, and then he didn't mention the climb and the turn.
Completely disappearing. Radio contact with the aircraft disappeared as well. Aerial searches conducted the next morning found the plane in a snow-covered farm field.
It wasn't a helicopter the way they show there. It was actually the owner of the plane who got into a plane himself when they never heard anything and flew the route and almost immediately spotted the plane because it was only a couple miles away. So he was the one who spotted it right away and then alerted authorities.
With no witnesses, it's difficult to say exactly what happened to the plane carrying Valens, Richardson, Holly, and Peterson, but experts estimate it hit the ground at more than 170 miles per hour. Authorities believe the tip of the right wing was the first part to make contact with the ground, and all 3 musicians were thrown from the craft as it flipped over and tore apart, before coming to stop against a barbed wire fence.
And there are actually photos of the crash site, and you can see Big Bopper laying in a field some distance away, Buddy Holly and Richie Valens laying face down right near the plane. It's very obvious to see that it's them. The pilot, Roger Peterson, was actually still in the wreckage of the plane.
Holly and Valens were each found about 17 feet from the plane, while authorities discovered Richardson around 40 feet away. Peterson became tangled in the plane, and police found him inside the fuselage. The event was so extreme, recovery crews discovered pieces of the airplane as far as 540 feet away. Although bad weather kept authorities from reaching the aircraft and its passengers for 10 hours, coroners believed all 4 men perished upon impact.
Yeah.
The official report by the Civil Aeronautics Board.
And I should mention, too, that there, like with anything involving famous people, there were conspiracy theories that cropped up, including one over the fact that I think Buddy had a gun. And there were like rumors about how they died and things like that. And so much so that Big Bopper's son, who I had the chance to meet a number of years ago, super nice guy, who he never met his father because his Big Bopper's wife was pregnant with their son when he died, and so he never met his dad. But he had his father exhumed. And they did tests, and they found that basically every bone in his body was broken. It was a ridiculously violent crash. And the only hope is that all 4 men died pretty much instantly because their injuries were so severe and that they didn't really feel a whole lot. But he definitely died from the crash.
Concluded that Roger Peterson, the 21-year-old pilot, was too inexperienced to be flying in a snowstorm. Peterson had logged 711 flying hours and had been flying for over 4 years.
There's the gyroscope.
But since the plane showed neither the engine nor other aircraft mechanics malfunctioned and the landing gear was still in the up position, officials said Peterson's lack of experience flying in snowy weather caused the crash. They also found no evidence anyone told Peterson about 2 flash advisories issued by the U.S. Weather Bureau that morning regarding an incoming blizzard that would greatly reduce visibility. Although a seasoned pilot could successfully fly through this situation, they would need to rely on their instrumentation to navigate since they wouldn't be able to see the horizon line out the window.
They call that being instrument rated. I don't know a lot about flying and things like that, but I do know that you have to be, it's a different level of certification to be rated to be able to fly only using your instruments and not being able to see. Because it's a really, it's got to be a crazy hard thing when you're in the air and you're trying to keep a plane in the air and flying in the right direction and all those things when you can't see the horizon to be able to tell where you are. And they think that's what happened, something called spatial disorientation, where you think one thing's happening but something else is happening because you're moving at a certain speed and there's G-forces involved and you can't see the horizon to know if you're upside down, right side up, left, right, things like that. It's impossible to tell when you got all this snow. if you've driven and you put your brights on and you see all the snow flying and you can't see a darn thing, imagine doing that in the air.
Ultimately, the Civil Aeronautics Board concluded that Peterson didn't have enough experience flying in this manner. It's also possible he may have become confused at the plane's gyroscope, which operated in the opposite way of other planes he piloted, meaning Peterson may have believed he was ascending, but was actually flying the plane towards the ground.
Think about that. He thought he was going up to climb to their cruising altitude, and he was actually flying the plane into the ground and had no idea because of the snow. Tragic stuff.
What do you think might have happened?
So that was interesting. It wasn't too bad, factually speaking. That's why I wanted to do something I knew a little bit something about. Obviously, the thing with Fargo, flying from Fargo to Moorhead, was just kind of sloppy, I think. And then missing the date, the February 2nd, February 3rd. Pretty minor stuff, I suppose. But it does concern me that now 2 of their videos I've watched, and there have been some pretty basic factual errors. It makes me wonder, a channel with nearly 4 million subscribers, how many people might be getting misled by their other stuff. So I don't know how much more of their stuff I'll do. If I do it, it'll probably just be to make sure that I'm correcting any possible mistakes with things. But if you want to check them out, the link is in the description to the original content. Let me know if you have a particular suggestion. I'm going to be putting up another vote on Patreon for what you would like to see next as far as reaction videos go. And as I mentioned earlier, if you want to hear me doing the cover of a Buddy Holly song, links in the description. You can check that out over on my other channel, VTH Extra. Thanks for watching.